Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me for another video. It is week 14 and it is getting critical as we head towards those playoffs. Some of you guys are in the playoffs starting this week. Whether you are or you're pushing for it and trying to get in next week, let's make sure we get those dubs so we can keep moving forward, advancing on the way to a chip. In this video, I'm going to go over the top 30 options at wide receiver. We're also going to cover a couple notable omissions and why I decided to leave them out of my rankings, at least for now. If you guys have any start or sit questions, make sure you drop them down below. I would love to get back to you and help you out. I'm checking all week up until kickoff. If you are new to the channel, welcome, welcome, welcome. Please like and subscribe. The support means the world to me. It helps me out a ton. It enables me to do what I love so I can keep bringing you guys the content that you love. With all of that said, done, and out of the way, let's get into week 14's wide receiver rankings. Per usual this season, back on top, I have Cooper Kupp as my number one player. He travels to Arizona to take on the Cardinals. And as predicted, Kupp was able to break his scoreless streak in a big way. He added another top 5 performance to his repertoire. That was his 5th of the year. He is on pace right now for 1,935 receiving yards and 15.5 touchdowns. Simply incredible stuff. This next guy is really gunning for that top spot. It's Justin Jefferson, who stays at home on Thursday night to play Pittsburgh. And Jefferson did, in fact, up his season projection after a dominating performance. And apparently I disrespected him, just putting him as my wide receiver 2 last week. Over his last 2 games, he's averaging 11 targets and over 144 yards per. And he scored 3 times. With Adam Thielen likely out for an extended amount of time with that high ankle sprain, the looks are going to keep coming. Staying at home in Lambeau against the Bears, it's Davante Adams at number 3. And I believe that this is the week that the touchdowns start coming from Adams, who has just 2 in his last 4 games and 5 on this season. The Bears are bottom 10 in the NFL for most touchdowns allowed, so he's got a good shot to get that going. Skyrocketing all the way up to the 4th position, I have Deontay Johnson, who travels to Minnesota, and that Vikings secondary is a joke, and Johnson laughed all the way to the end zone twice last week. In his last 3 games, he has 38 targets, 301 yards, and 3 scores. He has legit overall wide receiver 1 upside this week, and he snuck into the top 10 overall on the season at the position. Moving on to 5, Tyreek Hill stays at home against Vegas. And against Denver, Hill had the worst performance that he's had since all the way back in week number 2. He totaled just 22 yards on 5 targets. He probably sees twice that amount in this game against the Raiders, who are top 6 in points per game allowed to pass catchers. However, they allow the 6th most passing touchdowns on the season, and I think Hill takes advantage of that second bit. In at 6 and traveling to Tampa Bay, it is Stefon Diggs. Now, for the first time since week 5, Diggs finished outside of wide receiver 2 range, but due to that game conditions and the matchup that he faced, I'm not putting any stock in it. Tampa Bay does not have the star power to be able to stick with Diggs, and Josh Allen is going to need him in the worst way if Buffalo wants a chance here. I expect double-digit targets for Diggs for the first time since back in week 10. In the same game, I have Chris Godwin as my 7th ranked player, and whatever Chris Godwin did for Tom Brady before last week's game, whether that was a steak dinner or a nice present, the other wideouts need to take notice. Godwin saw 17 targets, catching 15 of them, and he turned that into 143 yards and a top 5 finish. It is probably someone else's turn this week, but Brady is no slouch. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. CeeDee Lamb is at 8, and he travels to Washington to take on the football team. And Lamb saw 13 targets against the Saints, which is the most he's had since week number 1. And while Washington has looked better as of late, they still allow the 3rd most passing yards and points per game to the position on the season. With a top 3 and top 13 finish in his last 3 games, CeeDee is going to continue to burn white hot here. Mike Evans gets a tough matchup with Buffalo. He is next up at number 9. Continuing to break free of his well-deserved boomer bust label, Evans finished inside the top 20 for the third time in his last 4 games. This time, he didn't even need a score to do it. I believe Tom Brady wants to make this a statement game, and he will utilize Evans heavily to do it, tough matchup or not. The last player in my top 10, staying at home against the Rams, it is DeAndre Hopkins. And Jalen Ramsey or not, Nuke needs to be in lineups. I get the concerns, and I get that the 2 targets last week is not encouraging, but he did score on one of them, and he's going to continue to see more work as he gets rid of that hamstring injury and rust. Do not overthink this. Nuke is going to show why in a huge matchup this week against the Rams. Moving on to 11, and DJ Moore has a home matchup with Atlanta. The Falcons allow over 38 points per game to receivers, and in their last 3, they've surrendered over 252 passing yards per game. Those are both bottom 6 marks in the league. That will help Moore build on his back-to-back wide receiver 2 finishes, and it makes him a must start. Call me crazy, but since all of the studs no longer really want to produce, I'm going to put someone in my top 12 who actually does. My last wide receiver 1 in week 14 is none other than T. Higgins, who stays at home against the Niners. It had to be done. Higgins surpasses his teammate in my rankings after back-to-back top 4 finishes. He's put up 252 yards and a pair of scores in those games on 22 targets and is looking absolutely incredible. The matchup against the Niners is a tall task as they are top 10 in yards per attempt and passing touchdowns, but I don't care, and I'm rolling with the hot receiver. Unlucky number 13, as of late, Jamar Chase is up next, and my finger is officially on the panic button here. I'm not going to press it just yet. I did, however, move Chase from a must-start wide receiver 1 position. He has earned that, as enough is enough. Chase hasn't finished within the top 27 since week number 7, and his 52 yards this past week are the most that he's had since then as well. Someone put some stripes on the ball, for goodness sake, so we can actually catch it. Please. My 14th ranked player travels to Houston, and it is Tyler Lockett. The return of Russell Wilson has been major for Lockett, who has 3 finishes of wide receiver 27 or better since. He's also coming off his first wide receiver 1 finish since all the way back in week 8. Houston allows 7.2 yards per pass attempt, which is 7th worst in the NFL, and he can work with that. His teammate, DK Metcalf, is next, and hopefully DK can work with it too, because it has been a horrible stretch over the last 4 weeks for Metcalf. He has just 13 catches, 130 yards, and no scores in that time, with finishes of wide receiver 54, 55, 90, and 33. Ouch. This may be the last time that he gets the benefit of the doubt. Another struggling stud at home against Dallas, and in at 16, it is Scary Terry McLaurin. And over the past 2 weeks, McLaurin has just 73 yards. So this plus matchup is exactly what he needs. The Cowboys have allowed more passing yards than anybody over their last 3 and are bottom 8 in points per game allowed to the position on the year. Moving on to 17, at home against the Saints, it is Elijah Moore. Few wideouts are hotter than Moore, who has 3 top 10 finishes in his last 5 games. With Corey Davis out for the year with a core injury, Moore could see double-digit targets from here on out. He's already averaging over 10 per in his last 3, and the Saints are a top 5 matchup, allowing over 38 points a game to pass catchers. He's day-to-day with a quad injury, so we'll keep a close eye on this situation as the week progresses. Up next, at home against the Giants, Keenan Allen is in at 18. And there isn't any clarity so far on whether Allen was a close contact or he produced a positive COVID test, but he is currently on the reserve list due to one of those 2. His status is up in the air for now, but if he plays, he should see tons of opportunities and continue to be fed targets. He has 66 of them in his last 5 games. His partner in crime, Mike Williams, is up next at 19, and Williams was able to put up his first 100-yard game since way back in week 5 and now has 2 solid performances over his last 3. He may face James Bradbury in this one. That shadow is likely, which could make it a long day, but Williams has the size to win a few battles. The last player in my top 20 traveling to Cleveland, it is Marquise Brown. And the struggle continues for Brown, who has finishes of wide receiver 43, 34, and 36 in his last 3. 2 weeks ago against Cleveland, he saw 10 targets but turned that into just 55 scoreless yards, so the risk here is obvious. More than anyone, Hollywood needs Lamar Jackson to step up and get back on track. My 21st ranked player is Hunter Renfrow, who travels to Arrowhead to take on the Chiefs. Finishing in the top 14 in 4 of his last 5, Renfrow has been on an absolute tear. The Chiefs are bottom 10 in passing yards allowed on the year, but are a different team over the last month. If Darren Waller comes back, he is likely to slide on Friday. I have Chase Claypool as my 22nd ranked player. He travels to Minnesota to take on my Vikings in prime time. And matchups do not get any better than this, as Minnesota is bottom 2 in passing yards, yards per attempt, touchdowns per game, and points per game allowed to the position. Yeah, we're bad. Thanks. I'll take Claypool's volume with 20 targets in his last 3 with that type of opportunity up ahead. Amari Cooper goes on the road to take on Washington, and he's up next at 23. Cooper hasn't finished within the top 40 in 3 straight games and has just 11 targets total in that time. But he's likely to be feeling much better after that positive COVID test a couple weeks ago, and I have a feeling that Dak is going to work to get him much more involved. My last wide receiver 2 goes on the road to face the Bengals. It's Brandon Ayuk, who failed to capitalize on last week's opportunity as the wide receiver 1 in that offense, as he dropped a pair of balls and played second fiddle to George Kittle. It remains to be seen if he'll get another crack at it, but the Bengals allow over 35 points a game to wide receivers, which is 11th most in the NFL. On to 25, it's Brandon Cooks, who gets a home matchup with the Seahawks. Cook's targets have disappeared since the Texans' bye, and he has just 14 in the last 3. This is a solid bounce back opportunity, as Seattle allows more passing yards per game than any other team in the league at over 275. He really doesn't score touchdowns anyway, so it is a perfect matchup. Moving on to number 26, traveling to Green Bay and Lambeau, it is Darnell Mooney. And Green Bay ranks 5th, allowing just 6.2 yards per pass attempt, but Mooney is seeing heavy volume, and he has 31 targets over his last 3. I am buying that, and hoping that it comes from Justin Fields and not Andy Dalton. Their report is the difference maker. Van Jefferson travels to Arizona, and he's in here at 27. Now, Jefferson has put together back-to-back top 20 showings, and he's scored in each of those games. He's going to have his work cut out for him in this matchup, as Arizona ranks 4th in the NFL, allowing just 6 yards per attempt through the air. Jerry Jeudy is up next at 28. He stays at home against Detroit. On 6 targets, Jeudy was able to muster a top 30 performance against the Chiefs, his best output since week number 9. With the Lions allowing the 4th most passing yards per game in their last 3, he'll see more opportunities and capitalize on them. Into 29 we go. It's Russell Gage, who travels to Carolina. He's been on fire as the go-to guy in this offense outside of Cordero Patterson. Gage has consecutive wide receiver 1 finishes with 192 yards and a touchdown on 19 targets in that time. Carolina is a brutal matchup and are top 5 in points per game to wideouts and passing yards per game on the year. At 30, my last ranked player of the week is Jarvis Landry, who stays at home against Baltimore. And Landry has had back-to-back finishes in the top 25 prior to Cleveland's bye, with 137 yards and a score in those games. 2 weeks ago against these Ravens, he dropped 111 yards. Baker has few other options, so the targets are going to continue to come. Traveling ever further into my notable omissions, I start with Deebo Samuel, who travels to Cincinnati. And there is hope that Deebo is able to suit up in this one, but it is far too early to tell. Check back in on Friday. As more information comes in, we'll have a better idea of what his chances actually are. Next up, it is Odell Beckham Jr. If he gets another touchdown against Arizona, I'll cave, okay? He's still the wide receiver 3 and had just 28 yards last week, and that was against Jacksonville. I am stubborn, and I am not folding. Michael Gallup is the last player I am talking about. He travels to Washington, and with back-to-back wide receiver 2 finishes, it is hard to exclude Gallup. But Washington's defense has been playing on another level, and for some reason, I just don't like his chances here. That'll do it for me in this video. Thank you so much for joining me for it. I hope you really enjoyed the content and took a lot away from it. If you guys have any start or sit questions as the week progresses, drop those down below. I would love to be able to engage and help you out. If you are new to the channel, if you enjoyed the content, or if you just haven't done it yet for whatever reason, please like and subscribe. The support means the world to me. It helps me out a bunch on my road to my first 100 subscribers. We are getting there. This is Relentless Press. I'm your host, Abraham Opass, and we'll see you next time.